Vietnam 1964 and 66, RPI 67.
Good morning, Captain. I see you finished breakfast early. Couldn't sleep?
I slept so soundly that I woke up early and hungry. Yes, but science and medicine have come a long way to compensate for some things. Many of the hearing aids you see here are likely high-sensitivity spyware listening devices. You can't trust old farts at all. Go on with your breakfast, and I'll meet you down the brick road in a half hour.
You look so comfortable in that wheelchair. I should get one. This bench is good for an hour or two at most.
I thought lawyers and judges toughened up their butts with years of sitting on benches.
It doesn't work that way, just as years of being a smartass doesn't make one more humorous.
Okay, enough chit-chat. Where were we before we got off track into tales of levitation?
You were back in Hong Kong after the Gulf of Tonkin incident to finish up shopping with your hostile fire pay while trying to avoid another tryst with the Australian honey.
Oh yes, then we went right back to Yankee Station for more of the same type missions against the North and Laos. Most memorably, the CINCPAC admiral who authorized hostile fire pay got his wrist slapped for it and was ordered to collect it back from us, inspiring an impromptu hootenanny in the wardroom one evening with appropriate songs and poems. A recited old soldier's poem I recall was, "You're paid to stop a bullet. At least that's what they say. So you stop a bullet, and then they stop your pay." The outcome was that the carrier division commander stuck up for us against the chain of command and shamed them into canceling the recall. It was an unusual and gratifying example of telling Washington to stuff it, and the episode turned out to be a morale boost for us. We were going to need one. Missions were relatively routine, but the long line periods and extended hours of flight operations, not to mention getting shot at, was wearing us down. At least we would be home for Christmas, we thought. Meanwhile, short port visits to the Philippines were small compensation. The colorful fun and games at the Kubi Zero Club had tamed. Still, there was lots of drinking at sea. The A3 Sky Warriors now had no mission except in-flight refueling, since Naval Air was relieved of nuclear attack self-commitments, so their large bomb bays were used for oddball shopping trips, such as picking up tailored flight suits in Thailand, lettuce in Japan, ceramic elephants in Saigon, and most importantly, booze from Kubi Point, with open sails on the hangar deck until it went quietly underground. My room was closest to the wardroom, and I had the only stuffed olives, so it became the spot for happy hour with friends before dinner. Vodka martinis to mask the odor of alcohol. When I ran out of vermouth and olives, we added the olive juice to the vodka. One evening, matters went a little over the top when Magoo slipped us an unannounced bottle of 150 proof vodka, which had us reeling as we stood hanging onto our chair backs during a long-winded grace by the chaplain. Nevertheless, we mostly managed to keep the lid on the drinking without consequences. Flying combat missions off carriers has quite a sobering effect.
Mostly managed to keep a lid on it, you say?
Matters nearly got out of control on Halloween. As we sometimes did, my pal Ed, who gave me his mandolin, Tom, and I had been playing and singing Harry Belafonte, as they called him in Trinidad, calypso songs, with Tom on harmonica, Ed on an olive can drum, and me on guitar. After running through Kingston Town and the others several times, plus 2 bottles of Courvoisier until the wee hours, we retired toward our rooms. Some folks, however, were going room to room playing trick-or-treat for drinks. So Ed, who was in no shape for it, was inspired to visit CAG. Unfortunately, CAG failed to find humor in having Ed bang on his door at 3 a.m. shouting, "Open the door, you son of a bitch. I know you're in there." It took a good deal of persuasion by Tom and me to talk CAG out of taking official action against Ed.
You said you were scheduled to be home for Christmas. You thought. What happened?
We were to be relieved by Ranger, but it had a major power plant casualty inbound to Westpac and nearly had to be towed to the Subic Navy shipyard for lengthy repairs. Coincidentally, Ranger's CO was Burley Grimes, the V-86 skipper who put me in the AJ left seat for my first cruise aboard Hornet. Unfortunately, the breakdown cost Burley his admiral promotion. To add insult to injury, America, the follow-on carrier after Ranger, also had a delaying engineering casualty. So December came and went with a dreary Christmas at Kubi Point and New Year's Eve back on Yankee Station. Disheartening day-to-day speculation on Ranger's progress dragged on through January, and we finally arrived home in February 1965. A 9-month deployment was difficult enough, but the extension also shortened the turnaround time for our next deployment in November.
The brief time at home must have had special family value for you.
I remember little about those hectic days, so things must have been pretty much at before at home. Aurelie remained a good mother to the kids, and they were great with each other, though Aurelie otherwise had little interest in being a homemaker and no concept of the value of money. She bought a small reproduction bronze Ming horse statue for a month's pay. Our 53 Studebaker had been parked for weeks after the engine was run without oil. Though the kids were happy, bright, and healthy, they were so unkempt they looked like ragamuffin orphans.
Did you express disapproval to her?
No, Aurelie was doing the best she could, and that was not the time for me to assert myself. If she was to bear the responsibility, it was best to let her do it her way. As we had done from the beginning, we kept the peace and made the most of matters. We still shared an interest in traditional music and hung out at coffee houses and campus folk festivals. However, the social cause had shifted from racial integration to anti-war protest. The music, therefore, had less musical value or interest to me. Also, my age and military haircut made me conspicuous in coffee houses and on campus. In any case, I was back on a heavy training schedule with deployments to Yuma, Fallon, and carrier ops. I hadn't stopped to ponder shore duty. After all, we were at war. Nevertheless, I filled out my preference card just in case my assignment detailer in D.C. was interested. One part of the card had a choice of do or do not desire graduate school. Although I had no motivation to return to school and my undergraduate GPA was dismal, I thought better of showing lack of ambition by checking the do not block. So I also had to select which graduate program I preferred. I found few choices for someone with a BA in psychology. The simplest would have been the Navy Postgraduate School at Monterey, except that it was a 2-year program at Navy's Company School, which was struggling for accreditation by flunking out many officers to demonstrate phony academic standards in lieu of having a viable institution with a qualified faculty. Instead, I found a 1-year management engineering program at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute with no thesis requirement. A safe choice, I thought. Surely neither Navy nor RPI would select me after reviewing my pitiful academic records. Besides, everyone knew that preference cards were rarely considered by detailers. So I put it out of mind as deployment time approached. Then, to my horror, I was notified to take the Harvard Business School entrance exam at San Diego State College. It was the toughest reading comprehension test I had seen, and I saw a bunch of them in testing courses as a psych major. I felt totally humiliated, certain I had done miserably, so I focused on deployment preparations. Other than the Hanoi Hilton, graduate school was the last place I wanted to be, so I took some comfort in failure. But soon came the real horror: orders to detach in May and report to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Troy, New York. Meanwhile, Joan Baez and her followers promised to blockade San Diego Harbor with yachts to prevent Rangers' departure. Flyers were also mailed to Rangers occupants, encouraging sailors to protest the war by deserting and taking shelter in a Mission Bay church. Then, one morning as we were loading aboard, we learned that Rangers CO was ill in Bethesda Naval Hospital. Reliable scuttlebutt, however, was that the CO was not ill, but was being confined to his hospital room, with Marines guarding his door. Reportedly, the CO had ordered the ensign assigned as Rangers postal officer to not deliver the desertion flyers. When the ensign protested that it was an unlawful order to interfere with the mail, the CO confined him to quarters, also an unlawful order. So the ensign called his senator, and we had a new CO just days before deploying. Had the real story of the CO's illness become public, the protesters might have taken some satisfaction in getting him fired. However, he was not heard of again.
Amazing. How successful was the Baez blockade and desertion campaign?
Whatever advance publicity value the threats had, the blockade was a flop. The Harbor Police and Coast Guard easily cleared Rangers' way and arrested the crews of the few yachts that showed up. The prospect of the looming bow of a 1,000-foot aircraft carrier bearing down was apparently too much for the spineless, draft-dodging liberal protesters. As Ranger cleared the coast unhindered, the few sailors who took shelter in the church were rounded up into helicopters and flown to Ranger, where they were confined to the brig under Marine guard to await courts-martial, far from the media and civilian courts. It was a proud day for me to be in the Navy, as was every other day.
So how was it to return to Yankee Station again?
So, same old stuff, just as we had left it. Ludicrous rules of engagement, restrictions against bombing high-value targets or mining harbors, and no plan for victory. However, there was a significant improvement in our aircraft with the installation of effective radar detection and electronic jamming equipment, defense against SAMs, which permitted improved tactics. Since we became equally safe from SAMs of any altitude, there was little reason to fly low within AAA effective range. With the slow prop-driven A1 Sky Raiders and unadaptable A3 Sky Warriors out of the mix, we developed Alpha Strike group attack tactics by 20 or more compatible aircraft simultaneously rolling in on the same target from various directions, which dispersed AAA gunners' aim and limited our exposure time. Thus, 3 golden rules of survival arose, which greatly improved our chances. 1. No repeated runs on the same target. Deliver all weapons on the first pass and get out. 2. No low pullouts. There were no pinpoint targets, so there was no need to get down in the weeds for accuracy against low-value area targets. And 3. No dueling with AAA sites. It was an utterly foolish risk to dive a $4 million airplane straight down the barrels of $4,000 guns manned by 4 men when we were very likely to be unsuccessful in placing a bomb inside a revetment.
Sounds reasonable, Captain. Why then were so many shot down?
Several reasons. Since we attacked the same areas repeatedly, the AA gunners learned that they didn't have to track us. With 150 guns ringed around the area, they could just cross their fire over the center and let us fly through it. Another factor was that some chose to disregard the 3 golden rules. Senior aviators, including CAGs and COs, were especially remiss, perhaps because they felt it necessary to set examples of fruitless bravery. Other heroes were simply going after medals.
Where were the MiGs?
Training in China at first, then when they returned to home bases, they flew training missions northwest of Hanoi and were not a threat. Actually, there was little reason for them to employ the MiGs since their AAA was more effective. Because we were doing little damage on the ground and our fighters were largely burdened with boring cap missions, flying 260-knot circles over the Gulf, everyone in naval aviation, from the admirals to the JOs, was obsessed with shooting down MiGs. It nearly became the purpose of the air war. There was even a kind of shoot a MiG, win a Silver Star suggestion contest to find ways to draw out the MiGs. I facetiously suggested circling a flight of Phantoms low in Laos, below radar detection, to await a big look early warning aircraft notice that the MiGs were taxiing out for takeoff. Then the Phantoms could pop over the mountains and blast the MiGs on takeoff before they even retracted their landing gear.
That seems hardly fair, Captain. Weren't there rules of chivalry in aerial combat, as in the days of King Arthur's knights?
That's the romantic image of gallantry that some fighter pilots may like to project. However, the reality was that most often, victims were sneaked up on from behind and didn't know they were being shot at until it was too late. Plus, many targets were lumbering bombers or outdated relics.
Silver Stars were awarded for that?
Absolutely, without question. Quite unjustified when compared with the true acts of bravery by real heroes doing the less glamorous, dirty hand-to-hand business of killing on the bloody battlefields. But that's the way it always was since World War I. No other warriors have ever captured public adulation as well as the romantic charisma of fighter pilots.
How did you feel about yourself as a fighter pilot at that time?
Mixed emotions. On one hand, I was proud and honored to be one and to fly cutting-edge airplanes. Otherwise, I recognized that we tended to be undeserving, immature egotists who were no better aviators than others. When I left Ranger in May 1966, headed for RPI, Troy, New York, I was of course relieved to leave Vietnam behind, but I was also not unhappy to be leaving Fighter Town and San Diego behind, despite the awful prospect of graduate school.
Still, after 9 years in San Diego, it must have been a traumatic transition for you and the family to move all the way across the U.S. to a totally new life as a graduate student at a civilian university in an old, small New England city.
True, Mike. I liked Coronado and La Jolla, but I never cared much for San Diego itself. It was a Navy town and commercial port like Pensacola, with the floundering Convair aircraft factory. Surrounded and hemmed in by the Mexican border, Pacific Ocean, desert, and Los Angeles, there was no escape. I never looked back.
So how was the move and transition to your new life?
Not bad. I had made military moves all my life, and they were surprisingly smooth since all packing and unpacking was well done for us. If you forgot to empty the trash cans, you'd find them the same when you unpacked. Thanks to a Navy predecessor at RPI, we rented a house 17 miles out of town in Averill Park, population less than 1,500. It was a lovely home, built in the late 1800s, with several acres and a stream in back. Thankfully, we settled in quickly, for my fears of academia were well founded. The outgoing class indicated that we would all make it if we made a team effort, and the faculty felt we were giving it our best. But for me, that meant 20-hour days with 30-minute naps. In addition to lectures, each course had a lab, and we had many group study sessions, so I was constantly driving to and from campus. In the experimental 6-week computer introductory course, using a primitive IBM processor and Mark Sense punch cards, we wrote programs in the 3 earliest computer languages: machine language, all zeros and ones, assembly, and Fortran. Though one of my predecessors had advised me to simply skip any problem requiring calculus, as he had done, I had to face my math deficiencies with the calculus required to write a computer program for artillery shell ballistic curves. The one other naval aviator in our group was also deficient in math, so we had to attend a special dumbbell class taught by a math PhD who had never left school longer than it took him to wash out of Navy flight training, and who could not fathom our ignorance. Unfortunately, he also taught all of the many math-based courses in the program, which focused on scientific decision-making, probability, statistics, and word logic problems. Since a B average was required for the master's degree, my C in a math course meant I needed an A to balance it, not an easy challenge at Rensselaer Probability Institute. We were trapped in an environment we had no control over, competing with very bright kids, highly motivated to maintain their draft deferments and scholarships, while we were also treated, as all students regardless of age are, by faculty, like children.
What was the campus attitude toward Vietnam?
Surprisingly positive. Instead of anti-war protests, student groups even invited representatives of the military-industrial complex, like Dow Chemical, manufacturers of napalm, to conduct well-attended seminars. RPI was truly a brain factory, like a lesser MIT, with an academically dead-serious student body. Once, going between classes on a Saturday, I noticed a football game in progress, with the stands virtually empty. No one cared that RPI was playing Harvard.
All work and no play, Captain?
No time for play at RPI, Mike, though there was one memorable light spot. Against the wishes of the administration and the community, the student union invited Timothy Leary for a stage presentation in the auditorium. To make the event palatable, however, the New York State Narcotics Commissioner had to be given equal stage time to balance Timothy's drop out, turn on, tune in LSD message.
Wasn't the phrase turn on, tune in, drop out?
That's one of 2 versions from later in 1967 at a San Francisco Golden Gate Park Be-In gathering of 30,000 hippies.
Refresh me on Timothy Leary. I only recall that he was a Harvard PhD psychology professor who conducted laboratory experiments with mind-altering drugs.
I don't want to get sidetracked much beyond Leary's RPI show, so I suggest consulting the internet, where I found this Wikipedia quote last night, which I'll include here as it pertains to that point in time. In 1966, Leary founded the League for Spiritual Discovery, a religion declaring LSD as its holy sacrament, in part as an unsuccessful attempt to maintain legal status for the use of LSD and other psychedelics for the religion's adherents, based on a freedom of religion argument. Leary spoke at the 1967 Human Be-In, a gathering of 30,000 hippies in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and uttered his famous phrase, "Turn on, tune in, drop out," which came to him in the shower one day.
Did you attend Leary's RPI event?
Oh yes, I can replay much of it in memory. Leary's followers occupied the front rows when the lights dimmed to total darkness and silence. Then Leary lit a single candle on the stage floor as the house lights came up dimly to reveal him in a white Nehru jacket and pants, sitting cross-legged on a rug before the candle and a glass of water. He began by saying that water and fire, as well as mind-altering methods, including psychedelic drugs, have been used in religious practices throughout history. Yet we understand that those elements can be dangerous if mishandled. While it is possible to experience spiritual awakening with drug use, it is not necessary, he explained. It's possible, for example, to achieve the same effects by dropping out of society and fasting on a mountaintop and tuning in for 40 days. Facilitating the experience with drugs is only a passing phase, he said, which may one day evolve into having the proper area of our brains wired up to a battery and switch in our pockets, whereby we can turn on any time for as long as we wish. After dropping out of society and going to the mountaintops to turn on, it is necessary to return to tune in to society again, to share the spiritual awakening with others.
So Leary was promoting the use of LSD as a religious leader, since it had been made illegal otherwise?
Yes, however, he also strongly warned others against it. He compared our usual lives to being actors in a TV studio, with our scripted actions manipulated by directors for episodes of Cops and Robbers or Cowboys and Indians. In the corner of the TV studio, though, is the newsroom, where we are never allowed. For the directors knew that if we dropped out of the studio and tuned in there, we would learn the truths which would permanently alter our outlook. We could never again fit into our former roles in the studio. He also warned that it was essential to have reliable, close friends surrounding you during LSD experiences.
I suppose Leary was a major guru for the counterculture revolutionaries.
To a degree, he surely represented the 60s generation's rebellious rejection of all the conflicting, inconsistent, and outdated institutional laws, values, ideals, and morality fed to them by their parents, teachers, preachers, and politicians. Instead, the hippies were reinventing American culture from the ground up, on their own, with reinvestigation of the world's religions and philosophies through drugs, sex, rock and roll, and lifestyles, whether at Haight-Ashbury, the concerts, dancing, happenings, or communes. But I wouldn't say that Leary was as important as other elements. In my opinion, the poetry of their creative music was the major uniting and motivating factor of the 60s culture and social movement.
How was rock and roll that important?
In this context, I wouldn't use the term rock and roll because it includes throwaway music played on the radio. Most serious music of the day generally wasn't aired on the radio because it was over 3 minutes long and wasn't considered commercial enough.
Well, they certainly played all of Elvis's records and still call him the king of rock and roll, Captain.
Exactly, Mike. Thank you for making my point. Elvis was a rockabilly star. 60s serious pop music evolved from American black country blues, which was admired and preserved in England, and then reintroduced to the U.S. by white British bands like the Beatles. Then Bob Dylan and many other singers, songwriter, musicians who grew up in coffee houses added to traditional music with electronics and mind-blowing sound systems to create a unique blend of great poetry and melodies. Concert attendance rivaled any other event in human history and made the 60s movement worldwide, though it was nowhere else as well understood as it was in its California origin, which had also given birth to the surfer's unique culture and musical contribution. For me, the music was as effective a psychedelic or social motivator as any drug or fasting on a mountaintop could have been.
And you know that how? Did you go to those big concerts or hate Ashbury yourself?
I went to a number of concerts and clubs in California and made two very memorable trips to San Francisco. We'll get to that in 1969. I stayed far away from drugs because they were much too dangerous for an aviator to experiment with, especially LSD, because of its long-term, severely disorienting flashbacks.
Yes, it surely wouldn't do to trip out during a night carrier landing approach, would it? So it wasn't all work and no play for you at RPI, was it?
No. In spite of the pressures and 20-hour days, I have fond memories. Though it began snowing in November and didn't stop until May that year, which provided exciting commuter driving challenges, the kids had a ball with their first experiences in it, especially sledding down the great hill on the vacant property next door. The retired RPI philosophy professor, who lived across the street, was relatively tolerant of ignorance during our lively happy hour discussions. Because he suffered with advanced emphysema, he extended his heated swimming pool season to year-round with a large inflatable rubber enclosure. With outside lighting and rising mist, the effect inside was quite eerie at night. He also had a large collection of antique black powder flintlock pistols and rifles, which we occasionally fired in the wee hours, thankfully without me putting a hole in his pool enclosure. What's more, the pastor of the church we attended was into traditional music and had coffee house programs at his church Saturday evenings, and he convinced Orly and me to perform twice for our first time in public. The challenge of playing an instrument and singing at the same time required hours of rehearsal. It was traumatic for me, and we were awful. But the thing about coffee houses and amateur folk talent was the tolerance of audiences.
Very nice. I suppose the year passed quickly and you were anticipating a tour with the Air Force flying the brand new F-111. Didn't you feel honored?
I should have. If I had given it any thought, I might have realized that the RPI assignment, and this one to fly our newest fighter, might indicate that I was being fast-tracked for a bright Navy future. But I just never figured it out. I was totally unprepared and shocked to receive orders to an A-7 Corsair II squadron at NAS Lemoore, California. Not only would I be going back to Vietnam for the third time, I was leaving fighters to fly subsonic attack airplanes based at the worst joke of an air station in Navy history. 3 calls to my detailer proved futile. The airlines were hiring. So many pilots were bailing out of the military. Plus, Navy was suffering heavy combat losses, particularly attack pilots. Moreover, Navy had successfully stuck USAF with the F-111 after modifying it so extensively that it was no longer capable of flying off carriers, and had quickly developed the A-7 to replace it and the A-4s. Recognizing the wall's handwriting, I pleaded for return to F-4s, having been out of the cockpit only a year. The detailer's response was memorable. "We've got a lot more fighter pilots than attack pilots, Manny. Carry out your orders."
But with an RPI master's degree now, your civilian options had broadened considerably. You could tell the Navy to stuff it.
It's true that the degree opened many new career doors to me, but there was a catch-22. Along with the RPI tour came an added 3-year active duty obligation. By that time, I would have over 16 years invested. The college tour was a Navy retention device to get midterm officers into the retirement pool, one reason I didn't feel all that special. So once reality set in, I resolved to make the best of it, as I had tried to do with previous disagreeable events. I did take satisfaction in achieving a master's degree in a more useful field from a top university, to be flying Navy's latest warbird, pin on Lieutenant Commander Oakleaves, and retire from my LSO career. Nevertheless, as a wise man once observed, it takes a lot of attaboys to make up for one aw shit. So let's break for lunch now and reconvene after your flight for dinner.
Suits me, Captain. Want to race back to the lodge?
Hell no. You know very well you'd win with me pushing this wheelchair uphill, and I'd be too out of breath to have dessert. You know the story about the old rooster, don't you?
Tell it, Captain.
There was an old rooster nearing retirement, so the farmer bought a young one. The old rooster was standing at the top of a hill in the chicken yard, perusing all the hens, when the young rooster introduced himself. "I guess you know why I'm here." "Sure," said the old rooster. "The time comes for all of us, but I'm not done yet." They stood in silence for a while, gazing at the hens. Then the young rooster said, "So let's run down there and knock off a couple of them." The old rooster replied, "Let's walk down and knock them all off."